Let's return to our top story and the development of the NHS app so that it can be used as a COVID vaccine certificate for international travel.
Joining us now is Transport Secretary Grant Shapps. Very good morning to you, Mr Shapps. We know that the government's going to announce May the 17th the new rules on international travel. Will we all need to, A, have the NHS app on our phones and, B, have been vaccinated in order to go abroad this summer?
Morning. Well, yes, first of all, you're right to say that the 17th of May is the earliest possible date for international travel. That's stage 3 of the unlock. We're not seeing anything in the data currently to prevent that from happening, so I'm hopeful that the 17th of May will be the right date. The second thing to say is, although we are clearly, because of our world-leading vaccination programme, getting on, and the lockdowns, frankly, getting on top of things here. Actually, just this last week, we've seen the world's highest number of coronavirus cases, some 800,000 over the last 7 days. So it's actually still raging elsewhere in the world, and it's easy to forget about the pandemic when things are getting under control here. So we're going to have to move ahead very cautiously. But within the next couple of weeks, I'll be saying which countries fit into the various different traffic lights, red, amber, green, with those green countries being the places that you'd be able to travel to without having to self-isolate or even quarantine in a government hotel when you come back. So that's the order of things. And then you get down to how you prove it. Well, we're working internationally to make sure that there's a system available that people are able to use in order to prove their vaccine status.
Because currently, because the reports that we're reading this morning, for instance, is that Spain, very dependent on British tourism. Lots of people will want to go there in the summer. They've said, yes, you can come from June, but you'll need to have, well, the reports are, a digital vaccine passport. Meanwhile, Greece, also very keen on British tourists coming back. Greece saying you can come from May, but you will just need a vaccination card, basically your appointment card, signed by a member of medical staff. I mean, that doesn't seem like a very joined-up approach currently.
Yeah, so next week I'm chairing a meeting of the G7, the group of 7 largest economies, the Secretaries of State for Transport in all the respective countries, my opposite numbers, in order to make sure that we do have an international approach to this. And clearly, things like being able to demonstrate your COVID status, whether that's vaccines or, of course, testing as well, will be very important. And it's not surprising, as you say, countries that rely on tourism are very keen to get tourists back. There's a wider question. We've got to be really cautious, given we've managed to get our numbers down, get on top of this coronavirus pandemic. But as we already know, the rollout of vaccines hasn't been that fast in most other places in the world. So we've got to do this very cautiously.
Will this then be reciprocal? Because it might be that Greece says, look, we just want your appointment card. But would we in return say to people travelling from Greece, yeah, your appointment card's fine? Or would we have a different standard for people coming here? How will this work internationally?
Yes, well, this is exactly why I'm meeting with the group of 7 largest economies to try to work on an international basis. And we'll be working with other international organisations, like there's an organisation called ICAO, who are the International Civil Aviation Authority, the World Health Organisation, and others, to make sure that as countries develop their different systems, they're all able to talk to each other and certify at the same level of assurance. But as I say, this is probably slightly jumping the gun. We're going to have to sort of be patient for a couple of weeks, because first of all, we've got to see from our own experts, that's the Joint Biosecurity Centre, which countries are actually applicable to go into the various different categories. And it's a question I don't know the answer to yet, simply because the experts, the medical experts, the scientists need to actually tell us whether they're happy and confident with different countries being in, for example, the green category, which means they need to have low levels of coronavirus, high levels of vaccination, be confident in their data, and of course be able to genome sequence, which is the technique used to see whether there are variants of the virus going on, of which this country does about half of the world's genome sequencing. Okay. It's not available everywhere. So there's a lot to look at.
I want to ask you just about India. because actually there is a huge crisis in India. Yes. And there are questions, A, about why we were so slow to introduce the hotel quarantine for India and to cut down on flights, and why we're allowing flights now at all from India. Are you satisfied that we are doing what we can to prevent the importation of the virus from India into the UK?
Yeah, yes, absolutely I am. And actually, I don't recognise the description that you put on this for several reasons. First of all, with regard to India, quarantine was already in place. Pre-departure testing was already in place. Day 2 and day 8 testing was already in place. And India doesn't have yet what's called a variant of concern. What they have is a variant of interest. And in fact, most of the deaths in India, we think, have taken place. Most of the viruses happened there because of actually the Kent variant. That's B117. That's the variant that we suffered from at the beginning of this year and back end of last year. So it's not primarily a concern over a variant, a mutation. It's really about the prevalence. And as I say, a lot of different measures are already in place to make sure that those cases don't come here. And when they do, we've got this surge testing and many other things. What people forget is, and this is why we're benefiting from this now, I think we're probably the only country in the world where every single adult and every secondary school pupil is entitled to 2 tests a week, which you can just order up to your home. And so we've got a level of testing which is really helping to keep things under control here, as well as a level of vaccination, which I'm afraid isn't available elsewhere. And those scenes from India are heartbreaking, I have to say, absolutely heartbreaking. Yes. And it shows what happens when these things get out of control.
Right. OK, let's talk about well, the big story regarding your party and the Prime Minister, Boris Johnson. Why does the Prime Minister need nearly £100,000 to refit Downing Street? Why does he need that kind of money?
Well, first of all, I don't know exactly what sum is involved, but I can tell you that Downing Street is obviously in an unusual situation because it's both a working office of state, but also a residence. But I do know that the Prime Minister's paid every single penny of the money required to refurbish his own flat, the bit that he lives in, even though, of course, that essentially belongs to the nation as a whole. So he's already paid that money. And I think this story, I'm afraid to say, is rather a lot about not very much. These flats require refurbishing. I noticed that Blair spent £400,000 or £500,000 on Downing Street, along with Brown, when they lived there, including public money on the flats themselves.
Where can we see the record of this then? Where is it? You're saying Boris Johnson has paid for this. Where can we, members of the public, go and see this now? Where can anybody go and see where this record is declared?
Sure. Well, it would be declared in the normal way, which is in the Cabinet Office annual report.
But Grant Shapps, when you've got a scandal brewing and people are asking the question now, if you're saying it's as simple as that, this is a non-story, you just said this is a non-story, why can't the Prime Minister go, there you go, everyone, there it is, there's the money, there's a declaration, let's move on and talk about vaccines, let's move on and talk about the future of the country post-pandemic. Why can't we just do that?
I'd say because there's a process and procedure to follow, which is the standard thing which happens, which is the annual report and accounts comes out. But just to answer your specific question... I'm sorry, I'm going to pull you up on that. On the ministerial register...
on the ministerial register, that hasn't been out. That's supposed to come out every 6 months. We haven't seen it since July. You talk about procedure. You're supposed to have a standards advisor that is supposed to keep you ministers in line with a ministerial conduct. You haven't had one since the last one was sacked 5 months ago. So you can't tell us that there is a procedure when actually you're not allowing procedure to take place.
Yeah. Well, I think the person who's taking that role it's in the final throes of that appointment going on, as I understand it. But the main thing is that the Cabinet, and to answer your question directly, the Cabinet Secretary has been asked to undertake a conduct review to actually show exactly what happened, the order of events of the maintenance and upkeep of Downing Street. But this story, I was just looking back in The Guardian, 2001, about Tony Blair refurbishing Downing Street.
Shapps, you can divert attention to Tony Blair.
No, let me just... But that is history. It's very important.
The point is, right now, Boris Johnson has £30,000 of funds that he is allowed to use for refurbishment. Parliament was told last week that Mr Johnson had an excess cost of £58,000. And what we do not know is who provided that £58,000. We know that Boris Johnson has now paid that money, but we don't know the original source of that money. So where did that £58,000 come from?
Well, I know you're desperate for me to come on and give you information which I don't know the answer to, but the good thing is the cabinet secretary, who is the most
no one knows the answer to it. That's the
civil
problem.
servant in the country, is going to carry out the review. He'll come to, I'm sure, a pretty quick conclusion on it, and all the information will be published. So you can carry on asking me the question. I won't be able to give you any further information because I simply don't know the answer, but the cabinet secretary will, and it will be published. And the main thing is,
this all happened at the beginning of last year.
The main thing for your viewers to know is the Prime Minister has in any case paid for this stuff.
Yeah,
so we can carry on talking about
where the money came from. Because the thing is, if where the money came from is significant, because people want to know, was anything done in return? Has it been properly declared? Has all the right tax been paid on it? Was it given by a donor? Was it loaned by the party? These are significant questions. And it is pretty remarkable that more than a year on, you don't know the answer. None of us know the answer. I mean, how many people does it take to ask the Prime Minister where he got 58 grand from?
Well, I suspect when it comes to these things, and as you rightly point out, there's a certain amount of money which is made available for the upkeep and refurbishment of Downing Street, and there is this sort of split between the bits which are working bits and the bits which are not, and that is why the cabinet secretary has been asked to, is indeed undertaking a review to set out the sequencing of how the upkeep of Downing Street has proceeded over the last year or 18 months or whatever it is. I would have thought the fact that the Prime Minister has actually paid for it rather renders the rest of the questions as a bit of an aside. And in any case, the amount of time that we're spending talking about the upkeep of a flat rather than the things that I hear the Prime Minister talking about in these meetings.
We're talking about the source of money given to the Prime Minister and whether that is a legitimate source and whether it is declared and there is transparency over it,
well,
and whether anybody got anything in return. And those are perfectly legitimate political questions to ask.
But as I say, the good news is both the annual reports and accounts and this work by the Cabinet Office will, I'm sure, reveal all of that, plus the Prime Minister's already paid. Now, why don't we talk about what the Prime Minister actually does during his day, which is to help us get to 65% nearly of adults vaccinated because he didn't accept the first plans that came to him about the vaccine rollout, or the fact that we're the only country that I'm aware of in the world where every adult and child is able to get a coronavirus test twice a week.
I think Grant Shapps,
this is the real work of the Prime Minister.
I think the concern is because the Prime Minister has got a history of lying. He lied before and he was sacked from the Cabinet. He lied in his job at one of the broadsheet newspapers. I think that is the reason why people are concerned, saying, are we being lied to once again? I think that's a fair enough question for the public to ask.
Well, look, I think those are very strong accusations to throw around. The Prime Minister has been democratically elected in this country with a 80-seat majority. It's very easy for oppositions to throw accusations around. I know you cut me off before when I tried to explain that their last Prime Minister actually used taxpayers' money for this purpose, and no one seemed to blink an eyelid, whereas Boris Johnson has paid for these refurbishments. I just think it's a fascinating story, but not nearly as fascinating as the fact that we're getting on top of coronavirus. We're not having to suffer some of these horrendous things that we're seeing at the peak of coronavirus of 820,000 cases over the last 7 days elsewhere, and there's a massive effort that the whole country has gone through to get there. And what are we talking about?
To be fair, Mr Shapps, I think the accusation that we haven't positively covered the vaccination programme is also a ridiculous one to throw around. We talk about it every day and celebrate that. That's absolutely that is absolutely the case. Anyway, Mr Shapps, we must leave it there. Thanks very much indeed.
Thank you.